Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give you a quick update on what went down last night at the Committee of the Whole meeting for Minneapolis Public Schools. Heather, we were there together, sitting next to each other for the first time last night together. How are you this morning?
Good. I love talking about climate culture framework school improvement plans. It was a great meeting for my interest level.
Yeah, I mean, last night's presentation was really strong too. I thought what was presented was really clear. I think it gave people a sense of hope in the midst of like a really tumultuous start to the school year, both in schools and in the boardroom. So I thought this was like a really strong presentation to talk about what can the future hold if we can, if we can move forward together and get this all right. So Heather, do you want to go ahead and talk through what went down last night at the school board meeting?
Yeah, so the nice thing is that like this slide presentation was so clear that literally we don't have to think about the night. We heard such a great update on the climate framework and we heard a timeline. We talked about how that is going to really tie into the school improvement plan and the weaknesses there. We got to see some examples of schools doing this work right now, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. We got to learn about how we are spending money to pay parents, teachers, parents and students specifically about how they're going to give feedback. We got to see some EDIA projects that are upcoming. We talked about the equity competencies. Those are skills that we're going to be looking for our teachers to have embedded in their daily practice and that they're going to be evaluated on. We got to learn about how there's going to be a flow chart and a real clear set of what to do when we have a hate or a bias incident, which there was a whole conversation about microaggressions, which I found deeply fascinating. And then we talked about like the mental and emotional well-being of our staff and how challenging that is and how we need to keep that focused. So it was a very excellent presentation.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it was a really thorough conversation that covered a lot. Senior Officer Moore presented for about an hour, and then there's like an hour and 15 minutes of question and answer. And several board members spoke up this time as opposed to the last school board meeting where we didn't hear from very many. So it was a very, very different tone to the conversation last night. It felt a little bit more together where people were like trying to work and move forward together. And at the same time, I think people were trying to make some points through their questions and comments that definitely had some subtext to what they wanted to bring out and point out about what's going on with everything in Minneapolis public schools.
Yeah,
Um,
there was definitely a little meeting within the meeting.
for sure. But I wanted to share our slide of the night. We had a couple actually, so this is the one that we could agree on, which we thought was really interesting, which was the way that we're actually going to be measuring climate throughout the year, right? If we're going to make this if we're going to make climate and culture something that we value, we also need to measure if we're moving towards our end goal and our vision of what that is. And so we thought it was super interesting, and we thought this would be something that parents in the community would want to know. What are the ways that we're going to be measuring climate and culture, and then who is going to participate in that? So we have, the kind of the tools that are going to be used are going to be a school rubric, and there's going to be a Cultivate survey that's been created by the University of Chicago that students are going to participate in. There's going to be the spring survey that students and caregivers and staff will participate in. And then there'll be the climate indicators that the probably the ARE department, the Accountability Research and Evaluation Department, will set up some indicators, and then we'll figure out what data metrics align with those. And so I just think it's gonna be really cool to see how are we measuring and what do we value when it comes to climate and culture. And the things that we measure are the things that we value, right? And so if we value the fact that students stay in school or are also monitoring like the suspension numbers, that means it's something that we value in relation to climate and culture. So pay attention as we see more of those indicators, more of these questions come out. What are the things that we value when it comes to our climate and culture in Minneapolis public schools? But I think this is really fascinating and interesting, and the nerd in me is like very excited to see this. So
Yeah, well, I mean, I think when we are clear on what we are measuring for and how we are going to measure it, accountability becomes more clear, right?
100%. Yeah, 100%. And I think that's why I'm so excited about it, is because like we have something tangible that we can hold the district accountable to, we can hold schools accountable to, we can hold school leaders, teachers accountable to, as opposed to this, what can sometimes be this like amorphous um, idea of how do I feel in a building? Do I feel welcome? There are going to be real things to measure that and how it's reflected. And we talked a little bit about how it's going to be reflected in evaluations for both principals and for teachers. And I think that's really amazing work. So kudos to the MPS team for putting this together, and let's see how it starts to operationalize as we continue to move forward in the cultivation of the climate framework. And so with that, let's move to our most valuable moment and our do better moment. So Heather, do you want to go first for your most valuable moment?
Yeah. So, the thing is, this climate framework and everything that we're talking about is going to be amazing. It's going to be transformational for students and teachers and families if we do it and if
If
we
we can
follow.
implement it, yes.
Right. Yeah, and we know that historically, both in our district and nationally, when it comes to students of color, it's implementation where we lose ground. So I think my most valuable moment last night was in seeing the example that was given was Anderson United Community School and how they took these values
Yep.
and they took an entire year to gather 500 stakeholders, right, input into it. And then we got to see the mission and the values, and then what students are going to see, feel, hear, and know to be true because of those mission and values. And we know that they used that criteria in their hiring process this school year. And for me, that was my most valuable moment because what I see then is the work of a school actually doing that. And I've been able to hear from a couple of teachers that work at Anderson that they can feel that difference in the way that and the tasks that they're being asked to do and the
Yep.
way that they're talking and teaching students. And so to me, um, I don't know, like that's the part in the night where I lean forward because I'm like, a school is doing this, that matters.
Yeah. I'll just give us a sub shout out or a co shout out here. Not my necessarily my most valuable moment because I have my own, but also to the work around like student leadership at Nellie Stone Johnson, and what their student leaders are activating in terms of what we want to see in our building, and how Nellie Stone Johnson scholars operate within Nellie Stone, and how they're creating like support and guidance and to foster that leadership across not only their like student government or whatever that leadership body was, but also how that then is meant to be supported for all of the students in the building. So I thought that was really cool. So just wanted to add to that as well. But my most valuable moment was the deep and rich conversation that was had about the Site Council Equity and Diversity Impact Assessment. I thought, last night we were telling some truths about Site Council that I think we've all known for years, but to have it in the context of to have that conversation in the context of a policy discussion and how we want to move forward. We're not just pretending, oh yeah, every school has a Site Council and it's all great and it's all um, equitably and equally implemented across the city. We're talking about the shortcomings of it. I'm glad there's like a partial EDIA being done on it. And so I just thought it was really cool to think about and see how can we actually be following the policy that's in place around site councils, and then also be thinking about, all right, what are the supports that are necessary and to actually make that true? Like, how are we ensuring that there's interpretation, that school leaders are held accountable to actually having site councils? What should site councils be participating in, and how can they actually utilize their power to being like actual change agents and makers in their buildings, to actually serving the kids and the students in their schools? So I thought that was a really, really powerful conversation. And again, it's one thing to have the conversation, it's another thing to have implementation. But this was a great to have a start for a conversation, because I think we've been ignoring the fact that our site councils aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. And not every school has been operating with a site council in the way that they should be. So I really leaned into that conversation and thought it was a positive one.
So that kind of leads me to my do better moment.
Okay.
I always like to be in the practical of things. And so I was able to attend a roundtable meeting that was supposed to be a combination. I think there's like also something we need to talk about, which is like the difference between a PTA and a site council, and like what are those included, and like where does the real power lie. But anyway, that's another conversation. But I was invited to a meeting in which I saw and observed Somali parents asking for translation in order to be able to participate in that meeting. And not only was it not like it was not provided, but the meeting happened even after parents said that they could not understand and could not participate. And so I think again, it's that example of like, we know that this is what our district is saying is going to happen, but when it comes down to the actual example in the schools and visiting a school on a Thursday night, that's not what we're seeing consistently across the district.
Yeah. And I think, that's why, one of our key principles or, policy priorities is to like strengthen accountability structures, because again, yeah, we can say all the great things. We can elect school board members who, believe in equity or are committed to equity, and they can pass the policies, but if there's no accountability structure to actually ensuring that that is happening, and we measure and we hold accountable the things that we care about, if that's not happening from superintendent to school leader, then like we have a real issue. So it's the strengthening of those accountability structures around the things that we really care about that make the difference between my most valuable moment and your do better moment, right? So
Wow. Yeah.
I think that's important. I'll say my do better moment was actually the conversation around the equity and diversity impact assessment on school fundraising. So I think that, this is a really important issue. And I know lots of folks have pointed out how inequitable our school fundraising is across the district. I just also feel like we have heard our senior financial officer speak so often around how our budget is essentially broken and we have to do something different. And I would have preferred that we would go beyond just the individual school fundraising to actually reevaluating all of the different areas where like how we spend money across the district, like all of the different funding mechanisms, not just the like individual like the school foundations or the PTAs. Like that is so super important, and we know is creating inequity and is also a relative drop in the bucket for like how the entire district is actually spending money in the ways that we make different budget decisions that we never actually evaluate. And so I would like to see us really dig into all of our funding mechanisms and how we're spending money, as opposed to just the one symptom or the one I guess like the one small little section of school finance. I think the whole thing needs to we have to take a look at the entire thing of it. And I know we've been passing audits and we've been improving in that area, and that's been great. But that's not what I'm actually asking for. I'm not saying that we're spending money inappropriately. I'm saying like we've made choices that we've just not re-examined for so many years around how we fund schools, and we need to maybe re-examine around whether that's the most equitable way to be funding schools. So that is my do better moment.
Well, I think one of my favorite quotes that you say is that equity is not a hug, it's a redistribution of resources, right? And so I think, yeah, it's like this study is important, but also like really thinking about like what do schools have what they need, and which schools have what they need, and how are we stopgapping that if the needs are not there, and what needs are going unmet, and where are we spending where there isn't a need. All of those questions really we could back up quite a bit more.
Yeah, and I totally agree that this conversation is such an important conversation around individual school fundraising and like how it creates inequities across the district. I just think that again, that should be a part of this EDIA, not the entirety of this EDIA, because I think what's going to end up happening is we'll do this EDIA and then we won't look at finances for a while. We'll go to another topic that needs an EDIA. And if we're going to be looking at how the district is spending money or how schools get money, we should look at the entirety of the way that, like the entirety of the balance sheet, right? Because we know that there's so many issues and so many problems. And it's not all Minneapolis's fault, right? It could be some of the ways that the state provides money and the limitations that the state provides. And so like, does that inform our legislative agenda, right? Like there's so many different things that I think are important to be looking at. And it just feels like we don't even want to look at the ways that we are just spending money and why we spend it that way and how we fund schools. And this is just kind of, because there's some controversy around it earlier this year, this feels like the Band-Aid that we're putting over it so that we are like, okay, we're addressing it and don't look over here at the rest of the finances, which feels frustrating to me.
And maybe you know what? I'll just say this: there's nothing like being inside of schools and seeing the differences.
Agreed.
Right. I mean, the reality is that you can go into schools on different parts of the city and we can play all kinds of games about how money gets to somewhere or whatever happens. But when you walk in school buildings, you can see the inequities. And so we can point fingers, right? Or we can own that we have different realities based on race and zip code, and we shouldn't be allowing that. And it's illegal.
Yeah. Well, this is supposed to be our quick update. So thanks for listening. And if you want to hear us dive deeper into stuff from last night, check out our debrief video. Thanks for listening.